Hi everyone. Today I am showing you how I make like a veined wafer paper peony. Now I'm using a template and I will have this up for the people in my email list who have signed up for my paper flower template library, and I'm starting that soon, but if you sign up for my email list, you'll be able to get in on that when I start releasing it. And I basically, you want to take 3 or 4 sheets of wafer paper. This is solid color wafer paper so that you don't have to worry about smearing ink. And you can color it later if you want with petal dust and that kind of thing. But go ahead and cut out a bunch of the smaller petals. I always do more than it says because then you have more than that you can work with. And I'm making two flowers here. So cut, inside the pencil lines. I'm using a pencil. Now this is a Fisker's. You just basically want a shaped scissor. It makes it a lot easier than trying to cut out the little wavy parts of the flower. And you can just kind of go and take little snips out of the petals, and then it gives it kind of that roughly shaped edge that peonies actually have. So you can do this, and I wanted to say you can also use your own peony cutters if you want to just trace those when you're cutting the shapes out. And be freeform. Peonies have a ton of petals, so there's no real count of the number of petals that you need to do, but go ahead and kind of, do all of the tips of the petals so that they all look a little roughly. I obviously have sped this up. Now for this, I'm using 2 different kinds of conditioner. This is the full strength. All right, it's a 1-to-1 glycerin and water. This is really strong, and I usually use it just on full sheets of wafer paper in order to manipulate it into sheets and drapes and that kind of thing. But you can use it for this if you want to just kind of curl the edges a little bit. You can vein these. I veined these a little bit, but what happens is the glycerin absorbs moisture from the air. So by the time you put the veins on the petals and they dry a little bit, the glycerin is going to absorb the moisture and it's just going to soften the veining out of it. So it's really kind of an extra step that you don't need to do. You can vein them though. And here I'm just kind of taking off some extra shape if it's a little bit too round once once I take a look at it. Now I'm using a foam flower former, and you can get this on my website. I will put a link in the description of this video. And you can take snips out of the petals and kind of manipulate them a little bit. Peony petals, like I said, there's tons of them, and they are all different shapes. There's no regularity to it. So a lot of times when you use a cutter or you use a template, you're going to want to go back in and kind of take some paper off just to give it a little variety. And if you're using the full strength glycerin, these are going to dry, but they're not going to be hard. They're going to be very soft, depending on how humid it is where you are. Now on this one, I am going to vein a petal just to show you what it looks like with the full strength. And I think that I did this on both sides. You want to give it a little bit of time for the glycerin to sink into the paper, just a few seconds, but you can feel it, and you'll be able to feel that the paper is getting limp, and you should be able to go ahead and vein it. Just gently press it. Do not be real aggressive with it because it will still tear the paper sometimes. If it does, I think it tore a little bit here. It's no big deal, but it gives it a little bit of shape. But like I said, this glycerin is so strong. Now this is if you're doing a flower petal, 1/8 teaspoon of glycerin to 4 teaspoons of water, or about that. But you can just take the full strength and dilute it if you have that on hand. And you can either do 1 or 2 sides of the petals. I think it's really better just to do one side of the petal, but it just depends. If it's really humid where you are, you're not going to need as much because like I said, the glycerin will attract moisture from the air. And if you just do one side of the petal, it'll dry faster and it won't shrink as much, because that's the one thing that happens with the water getting on the wafer paper. It'll make it shrink and kind of shrivel up. It won't melt, but it will shrink. Now these are the petals that have dried overnight. I left these overnight and they're still really soft from the full strength glycerin water conditioner. And you can see how flexible they are. These are not necessarily going to hold their shape as well on the flower, but they're good to use for some of the petals on the inside where you really need to be able to position them and move them around. So it's not a completely terrible thing to use those, but it's better to use the ones that have the flower conditioner. This is the one I just did. And when they dry, and they dry pretty quickly, when they dry, it takes them maybe, 10, 15 minutes to dry enough that you can put them in a little container. Just take the ones that are dried, stick them in a container, and you can make these up ahead of time and just use them when you need them. So that's what I was doing here. I just made a whole bunch. I put them in this little container, and as I make the flowers, I'm going to go in and pull them out. Now here's the center. This is a 1.5-inch styrofoam ball on an 18 gauge wire. And I have done a hook. I've shoved it into the top, and I've bent the bottom so that it will not move around. And I don't use hot glue or anything. It's just a lot faster to do it this way. So I've taken a large circle. It's about a 5 or 6-inch circle of wafer paper, and I'm going to cover the ball itself. And to do that, I'm just kind of cutting some slits in here so that I can fold it around the ball. I'm going to spray this with vodka because you want it to stick, and the glycerin and water isn't really going to stick as well as the vodka will. Put that on top of the ball and just kind of fold the wafer paper around. This clearly does not have to be perfect. It's just to cover the ball and to give the wafer paper something to stick to, and also to just kind of disguise it if some of the top of the ball, where the petals are at the very top, stick out. So you can take some more vodka, spray that on there, just stick it down. This obviously is, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to give the ball a surface because the wafer paper isn't going to stick to the styrofoam, but it will stick to other wafer paper. So go ahead and do that, and then the ball will be ready to use after it is all covered. And you might want to take some scissors and kind of trim that off, or like I do here, just stick it to itself with more vodka. Either way will work, and you just want to get a good surface to work with, and that's basically it for the center, okay? So once you're done with that, what you want to do is find the smaller petals. And here, that's a larger one. So you want to find some of the smaller ones because you're going to start at the middle and work your way out. So the petals are going to they're going to dry, but they're not going to dry perfectly curved. You can dry these in like an apple crate or a pear crate that you get from the grocery store, but you don't really need to because peony petals go everywhere. Now see how flexible, this is still a little bit flexible, but it's not super flexible. Now I'm going to use vodka for this. I'm going to put a little bit in the container. This is a deviled egg plate that I got at the dollar store. It's great because you can do all kinds of different liquids in it, okay? And you basically want to just cover the top with the petals, just like you're making any a flower, rose, whatever. Just make sure that that little hook part is covered so that we don't have to see that. And with the way that peony petals work is they're very irregular, and you can do pretty much you don't have to overlap them in a certain way, is what I'm trying to say. So just take the smaller petals and stick them to the top, and you're going to work your way around just, however you do a wafer paper flower. It's the same way for everything. Just start, and you're going to make a spiral of petals as it goes around. Just do a little vodka at the base of the petal and hold it on there until it sticks, and it will stick to the wafer paper that you have covered the ball with. So just keep working your way around. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be overlapping in a certain way. There doesn't have to be a certain number of petals. Peonies have a very large number of petals. If you ever take one of them apart, you'll be shocked at how many petals are on them. And it just gives it that very roughly appearance. Now for this, I'm kind of looking at the petal and I'm seeing which way is it curving. So if it's curving more like a spoon, you want the spoon side, the concave side, to be toward the center so that it fits around the ball for this center piece. And when we get to the larger petals on the outside, you're going to keep doing that until you get to the very last 1 or 2 rows, and then you want them to kind of go the opposite direction. But for now, you're doing them in the same way that they fit the ball of the styrofoam center as you're going around. So just keep doing this, and you're going to move to, like, I think there are 4 different size petals here. So I started with the smallest. Now I'm going to the second largest one, kind of in this area. And if one of them rips like that, that's okay. You can just stick it back together, or just leave it. It doesn't matter, like I said, because peony leaves, or the petals, are so irregular. A lot of them have very ripped kind of look to them. But if you want to fix it, that's fine. And as you move out toward the side, or toward the exterior of the flower, you're going to just go with the larger petals. So keep working your way out. And I think that is a smaller one. You can put a smaller petal in. It's okay. And these have not been veined. I think these actually were veined, but because it is so humid and I used the 1-to-1 glycerin water, see, they don't look veined. But that's okay because it's so tight on the center of the ball, you're not really going to see these petals anyway. And one thing when you're making wafer paper flowers, especially if you're making them for wedding cakes and you're selling the wedding cakes, is you have to think, what amount of detail do you really need? Because each flower has kind of a distinguishing trait, and as long as you portray that, it's going to look real. And you might not need to put as much detail as some people do in these flowers because it takes a long time to do that. And if you're doing cakes professionally and you're selling the flowers, you want to have the detail, but you don't want to spend 3 hours on one flower. You know what I mean? So veining them this way for the outer petals is a good idea because it gives them that detail on the outer petals that people see. On the inner petals, it's not as important. All right, so at this point, I'm kind of on the outer petals, and I'm sorry that I'm holding the flower down a little bit low. It's hard to see where I am when I'm doing this with the camera, like where the camera is. All right, so that's the last row that's facing in. And now I'm going to take the largest petals and try and start facing them out so that it looks like they're falling away from the flower. It's like the very outer layer of petals kind of opens up and falls away from the flower as the flower opens up. Now this one, see, it's a little bit bent. So all you have to do is take some vodka and or water, you can use water, wet the petal and kind of let it soak in and it'll soften up and you can reposition the petal. All right, so I'm taking the petals and looking at how they're shaped. If they fall away from the flower, that's the way I want to do it. And I'm going to go all the way around with just one row of these. And you don't really need to worry if they're a little bit long. Like if you put them in place and they look a little bit long, that's okay because they're paper and we're going to go back and trim that. So just go all the way around the flower and keep looking at it, trying to make sure that it looks kind of even and that you're not making it too asymmetrical, because sometimes you put a lot of petals on one side without realizing it. Just work your way around and try to keep everything even lengthwise and it should be okay. But like I said, if you do get one petal that's a little bit longer, that's okay because you can go and cut it. And I think I do that on this flower, or maybe it's the next one. I don't know. And sometimes you just need to hold it in place because these have been conditioned, veined, and dried. They might be a little bit hard to attach to the flower, but you can go ahead and just adjust them by brushing a little bit of vodka or water. If you don't want to use the alcohol, that's fine. It's just going to take longer to dry. The vodka works well because it evaporates quickly and it dries fast. But you can use water if you don't want to use the vodka. But just go ahead and attach all of these petals on. And if you need to go back and make adjustments, you can. And I think that I will show you that I do that in one place here. Because if it looks like a petal is falling too far away from the flower or that kind of thing, you can go back and see I'm hooking this over my finger so that I can get a good grip on it. For example, this is a good example. This looks like this petal was falling away from the flower. And I'm just putting extra vodka on it to kind of soften the petal and attach it to the one right next to it. And you can do that just to make sure that the shape of the flower is what you like. And if you want to go in and see that side needs an extra one, so I'm going to put another petal on there. But if you need to go in and brush it, if you want to color it, you can do that later. And if you need to trim it, here we go. So you can just go in and trim the extra piece off if there's one petal that sticks out too far. And there you have your peony. So if you want to go in and brush this with petal dust, you can. There's really no reason to do that. Like I said, you have to consider how much work is it going to be on top of what you need to do? Because if you put a solid color white peony on a wedding cake, it's going to be beautiful and people are going to like it. If you want to add that little extra level of realism, you can go in and add some color to the tips of the petals or on the inside, and that will add extra time. So if you are charging for these flowers, please make sure that you're charging for your time, because that just, the more realistic a flower is, the longer it's going to take. And you just have to decide how much do you need to add to that in order to have the value for the customer, because that is a pretty flower and that's going to look really nice on a cake. And that's without any dusting. All right, now to make one that does not have any wires, you start from the outside and work your way in. And I did another video about this where I veined the petals a different way, and I am doing it this way this time with just the glycerin and water because it's a little more accessible and people don't always have all the veining mats. So take the circle, spray it with vodka because it's going to make it stickier. And all you need to do is just go and start sticking the petals. These are the largest ones that I have available. I'm going to stick them to the circle. And if I need to add some more vodka to the petals, I will do that. And I think I do that. Here we go. I'm going to speed it up. And I will move this to that little blue mat in just a minute so that you can see it better. I know it's hard to see the white on white. Okay, so let's put that on the mat. And see, this is just the petals on the circle. And now we're going to start adding vodka to the flower itself and just sticking the petals on it. But it's good to add a little bit of vodka to the petal and then kind of bend it a little bit so that it sticks flat. Bend it and stick it flat on there and just press it down. You're not going to hurt anything. And you want to just build layers of these roughly petals because that's kind of the signature peony thing. Like, you know, like I said, every flower has one detail that makes it identifiable as that flower. And for the peonies, it's this excessive number of very roughly petals. And sometimes it's all the yellow stamens, but a lot of peonies don't have stamens the way that they open up. So you don't need to worry about stamens on every single flower, but you do need to worry about a lot of roughly petals. So veining them does work to give it that effect. And like I said, you can make these petals up ahead of time and just put them in a container until you need them. Now, here I'm adding one between two layers because you see this one petal is sticking up, and so I need to fill that in. So, you know, don't be afraid to go in and put petals in a strange place. And see, this petal is a little bit too curved, so I just put some vodka on it to loosen that up. And I'm just going to keep working around, adding things to the inside as I go. And by the time you get to the next layer of the smaller petals, it's going to start forming a cup on the inside where you're pressing your finger into the middle. And that is good because you want to have a little bit of room on the inside for those stamens if you do want to put the yellow stamens on. And keep going like this. And you just look at the petals. You might want to do a smaller one. You might want to do a larger one. It's totally up to you. You just want to fill the flower in so that it looks realistic and it has a good shape and a lot of the roughly petals. And now this flat flower is good for putting directly on a cake. You could put it in the center of a cake at the top. It doesn't have any wires. There's nothing inedible. You don't have to worry about somebody grabbing it and biting into it and biting the styrofoam. And that has happened before. People think that flowers are all sugar and they think that they can eat them, and it's not always the case. So sometimes it's good to have flowers that have nothing inedible in them. It's just a little bit safer. You don't really have to warn people about things, but if you do deliver a cake that has wired flowers on it, you should definitely tell whoever's going to be cutting the cake what they need to take off of the cake before they serve it, because you don't want someone cutting through the wires. And I have heard of that happening. Someone used an electric knife to cut a cake. It cut through all the wires and they served the cake with the wires in it. It happens. You don't want it to happen to you. So just make sure that you communicate with the person who's going to be cutting it. But just keep going, you know, go in there with the petals, keep working your way in. And you see how this is really forming a cup now. There's a kind of an open space in the middle. And just keep pressing the petals in there until it's completely full. And just move to the smallest petals as you move to the center. And eventually it's going to fill up and you're not going to have really any more room to put more petals in there, except maybe a very small spot. And then you will be done. But you can also add the yellow stamens to this variety. And you can do this wired if you want to. If you want to wire some stamens onto a stem with floral wire, you can insert it into the middle of this flower and pull it through. But sometimes that's hard to attach because you have to attach the wafer paper to the floral wire. It's a little bit difficult, and sometimes it's easier to create the stamens and then build the flower around the stamens if you're going to do it that way. For this style flower, it's a lot easier just to add the yellow stamens at the end, and I will show you how to do that in just a minute. But see, at this point, I'm using the paintbrush to push it down because there's really not that much room for my fingers to get in there and attach things to the inside of that flower. And by the time you get down to the last ones, you should be moistening both the front and the back of the petal so that it gets really wet and you can really press it down in there so that it'll grab onto the flower pretty strong and not fall out, because you don't want your petals to fall out. Okay, so now that you've got this, and I'm pointing at that. Okay, so that must be too long. See, I'm cutting this one off. I can't really tell from this angle. But just take a look and see if it looks symmetrical, if it looks nice to you, if you need to add anything else to the outside. You can always add a petal to the back if you want to do that. But if you're done and you want to add the stamens, just cut out a piece of yellow paper, or you could do, white paper that has petal dust on it or food coloring or whatever. And just cut some tiny little slits in it so that you're making a fringe. And you don't need to do the entire thing. I think I did this is about a 2.5 inch strip, 3-inch strip, and I didn't end up using the whole thing because you really don't need to. Just do about 1 inch of it, and then you're going to fold it to see if that looks right to you. And this is completely up to you. If you want a lot of yellow, then you're going to want more of it. I personally don't like that much. I like to just be able to see a tiny hint of the stamens on the inside. And so I don't, do a huge one. So just roll this up until you see if it looks like about the amount that you want to use or not. If it looks right, just go ahead and pull this off. And just be careful not to knock the little fringes off because they're going to want to fall off. So take some vodka or water and attach the wafer paper to itself and just kind of get it in there and get it really wet and pinch it so that it's contained just on the bottom of that strip. And obviously you're not going to cut, when you're making the strip, you're not going to cut all the way through. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch of the paper so that you can work with that. So get that bottom part really wet, not the fringe side, the solid side. You want to wet it all the way around so that it's pretty soft, and you'll be able to press it onto the wafer paper or flour without a whole lot of effort. See, it's very bendy. And then you're going to go over to the flour and very carefully open it up in the center and stick that down inside it and just press it in until it grips, because the wafer paper will stick to itself once it's wet. So there you go. That's all you need to do. And then if you need to add some extra petals around it to kind of disguise it, that's fine. I think that's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. And now you just have that little hint of yellow in the middle, and it gives it a little extra touch of realism. I think I did go in and add some more petals. So if you do want to add a petal, do both sides. And you can just kind of go in and see if there's a space around that you want to stick it to. Okay, so see, that looks like it needs to be adjusted a little bit. Yeah, okay, so I go in and with the scissors, I'm not cutting it. You can cut it if you want, but I'm just kind of prying it off because it looked like I think I kind of separated the stamens. But that's okay because, like I said, peonies are very irregular, and that'll just give it that little bit of yellow in the center to give it a little bit of realism. But there you go. So that's the wired center and the, oops, and see, it doesn't break. And that's the unwired, it's completely flat. Both have the veined petals. It's actually fairly easy to do those. Just give yourself time to vein the petals and let those dry ahead of time, and you'll be able to put them together pretty simply.